10 mistakes now which I often make, and I'm sure other English speakers make these mistakes too. However, I want to try and show you that it's not necessarily the case that these are technically mistakes nowadays, because they're so common they could well be considered colloquial English. In fact, they are definitely colloquial English, but the question is whether you should use them or not, and I suppose that depends on the situation. So let's give you some examples. Number 1 and number 4 were they occurred to me because somebody wrote on my other videos and said, isn't this actually wrong? And isn't this actually wrong as well? And yes, they were absolutely correct. This is actually wrong. The correct version would be, he is the same age as I am. We'd need to use I here because we need to use a subject and not an object. And it is precisely the same with number 2. When we say, me and my friends went to the cinema, we're actually mistaken, although it's far more common than the correct version. The correct version is my friends and I. But I believe that this sounds rather formal nowadays. If I said this to some of my friends, I think they'd be quite surprised and think Dave's speaking in a very posh manner today, or he's speaking in a very academic manner. But nonetheless, that would be correct, because this is the subject I, and we're using an object me, and so it's not correct. Exactly the same as number 3. When somebody says, who is it? I think we all, on the phone, for example, somebody says, hello, who is it? If we know that person knows our voice, very often we say, it's me. But it's not correct. It should be, it is I, or very often people say, tis I, if they want to sound kind of old-fashioned, because it does sound old-fashioned, tis I, but it should be, it is I. Yeah, it is I. It shouldn't be, it's me. We need to use the subject again. And the same here, if you're a teacher in school and you say, who wants to start first? I guarantee all the kids will say, me, when really they should say, I do. But I guarantee they say this one. So these are all very common mistakes. They're certainly mistakes which I make, and I make them without noticing that they're mistakes, which is perhaps not a good thing to do. But I want to thank the person who wrote to me on my wall and explain, and well, they did it in a very nice way. They just suggested that it might be wrong, and I agree. Technically, it is. If we're talking about the pure grammar, yeah, it's wrong, and we should be using a subject and not an object. However, it's become so regular and so common, I do wonder whether we should call it a mistake or not. Number 4 is definitely a mistake. Don't do it. But I make this mistake, and shame on me. If you've got a pronoun before mother, father, or something like that, you shouldn't be using a capital letter. It should be my sister with a little s and my mother with a little m. So I've capitalized unnecessarily, and I've done that in a few videos. Please write to me if I make mistakes on the videos. I won't be offended, as long as it's done in the right way and not in a rude way. But I won't be offended. Everybody makes mistakes, and it's interesting for me to see my own mistakes. So please make comments if you see them. I'm sure there are hundreds all over the videos which I make, because nobody's perfect and nobody can avoid making mistakes. Completely, I mean 100%, but please try and avoid making them. Number 5 is another mistake which I very often make, and for a long time I thought all school subjects should be capitalized, but they shouldn't. We only capitalize languages. Okay, but you don't capitalize subjects at school. Let me make that very clear. It's a little c. We don't capitalize school subjects. It's only languages. Okay, number 6. There are less people than I expected. This is a countability mistake. It's unforgivable, really, in my opinion, but again, very common, and I'll make it sometimes without noticing. We should be saying fewer and not less, because people are countable. 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. It's countable. Number 7 is a mistake which I made when I first started teaching, and one of the members of my class, a young girl who was, she was very young at the time, but her grammar was good, and she said that this was the wrong tense. And she was right, of course. And again, I think this is an unforgivable mistake in the sense of you won't sound very educated if you make this mistake. She looked in her bag and realised her purse had been stolen, because the action happened earlier than she looked in her bag. And so this sounds much better to me. It certainly sounds much better than to use just past simple, although I'm certain that when native speakers are speaking fast, they very often make mistakes and just use past simple and don't perhaps remember to use the past perfect. But that doesn't mean it sounds good. I don't think it necessarily does. The same with these ones. They don't necessarily sound good, but if you use it in the wrong situation, you might sound a little bit pompous or a little bit posh. Okay, number 8, I've forgot his name. Of course, the third form, please. I've forgotten his name, but very common mistake. Lots of people make this one. Or, you know, I think not just with forget, but with lots of other irregular verbs. And my children, as they're growing up, they very often say took instead of taken or something like that. Okay, number 9, this was a mistake which I made loads at school, but I don't make any more because I know what a past modal is and I teach them quite often. So I could have done, must have done, may have done. I don't think that this is a very common foreigner mistake, because I haven't heard many English learners using could have done. I think it's young kids in England, it's native speakers that make this mistake because they're not aware of past modals. And the last one, number 10, is related to 1, 2 and 3, because we have 2 kinds of who. And I want to mention someone else who spoke to me recently on the bottom of one of the videos, and they said, surely this is whom are you talking to? And I said, yeah, you're correct, absolutely right, because whom is the object and who is the subject. And here the question word is the object, actually. I am talking to him. I am talking to her. And so the person made a very good point. Now, I'm sorry, I think I offended him. Perhaps I can be a bit impatient sometimes and a bit rude, it's true. And I said, oh, I think you'll sound a little bit ridiculous in some situations saying, whom are you talking to? And he said, I don't think I'm ridiculous using this. And he's not. He's absolutely right. I shouldn't have said that, really, because this is the correct way of speaking. And it's just that very, very few people remember this m nowadays. I believe in America they do it more often than we do in Britain. And so if you want to know the correct version, that is technically correct. But so many people now just say, who are you talking to? In the wrong situation, you might sound a little bit over the top, a little bit like you're exaggerating your academic English in the wrong situation. But nonetheless, they're right. So please, if any of these mistakes interested you, ask me questions about them under the video, and please tell me if I make mistakes in other videos, because I know that I do, and it's always interesting to see our mistakes and have a bit of a laugh about them. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you all soon.